Your neighbor smiled at you this morning, waved from the driveway. Left hand on the car door, right hand up. Quick wave, the kind that says, "We're fine, everything's normal, see you around." He does it every day, has for 3 years. And you've never once wondered what that wave actually is. It's a scan, not a conscious one. He's not plotting anything, not yet. But every morning when he waves, his eyes move. They track the recycling bin, what you bought this week. They note the car in the driveway. Are you home? Is your wife home? Is the pattern the same? They've registered the Amazon package on the porch, 3rd one this week. He doesn't write any of this down. He doesn't need to. 3 years of waves from the driveway, and he has a more complete operational picture of your household than most surveillance teams build in a month. He knows when you leave. He knows when you come back. He knows which days the house is empty. He knows you've been ordering more lately, and he knows all of this the way you know the weather, automatically, passively, without effort. It's just there. Now remove the normal world. Take away the grid, the police response time, the grocery supply chain, the social contract that says his knowledge of your routine is harmless. What's left, a man standing in his driveway who knows everything about your house and nothing about how to feed his family past Thursday. That's not a neighbor anymore. That's a profile. Yesterday, how to sleep safely when the world isn't. Today, the person who was awake the whole time, watching. Not because he's evil, because that's what neighbors do. They watch. And in a normal world, watching is just living next door. In an abnormal world, watching is intelligence collection. The only difference is what gets done with the data. Here's what nobody in this space will say out loud. Your street, the one you live on right now, already contains every threat type that matters. Not strangers, not roaming gangs, not the apocalyptic fiction that survival channels sell because it's easier to fear a faceless mob than to fear the man who borrowed your lawnmower in June. The actual danger profile of your first 30 days sits within a 200-meter radius of your front door. And you wave at most of it. 6 profiles, not types I invented. Patterns that repeat across hurricanes, blackouts, evacuations, and every documented case of neighborhood-level resource conflict in the last 30 years. Each profile has recognition markers you can check against your street today, while everything is still normal and checking is still just an exercise. Each one has a transition point, the specific moment when the person you know becomes someone operating on different rules. And each one is someone you'd currently describe as a good neighbor. That's the part that should bother you. Let me walk you through them the way a profiler would. Not as a list, as an investigation. Because you're not studying strangers. You're building a case file on people you already know. Start with the window. The one across the street or 2 doors down that always has the blinds cracked. Not wide open, cracked. Enough to see out without being seen looking. There's a person behind that window who is home more than anyone else on your block. Maybe retired, maybe works from home, maybe on disability. The reason doesn't matter. What matters is that presence equals data. And this person has more data on your street than anyone, including you. The watcher. Not because he's sinister, because watching is what happens when someone has time, proximity, and a window. This is the neighbor who can tell you which day your mail carrier changed routes. Who noticed the new car parked at the end of the street before anyone else mentioned it? Who knows that the family at number 14 leaves every Friday at 6 and comes back Sunday night? He absorbs the rhythm of the block the way a security camera absorbs footage, passively, continuously, without discrimination. The recognition markers are specific. He's always home. He knows details about neighbors he doesn't socialize with. He mentions things. I saw your wife left early today, with a casualness that doesn't register as surveillance, but is. He's pleasant but not close, friendly but not friends. The distance is the feature. It lets him observe without obligation. Here's where it turns. A watcher in normal times is just a nosy neighbor, annoying at worst. But under resource scarcity, the watcher becomes the most valuable and most dangerous person on the block, because he knows who has what and who doesn't. He knows which houses receive deliveries. He knows which families went shopping more often in the weeks before things broke. He knows which garage has a generator because he heard it test run last Saturday. This is not speculation. This is what 3 years of passive observation produces, a complete logistics map of your neighborhood, stored in one person's head, available to anyone who asks the right question or applies the right pressure. The watcher's transition point is not when he decides to act on what he knows. It's when someone else discovers that he knows it. In a neighborhood outside Houston during a 12-day grid failure after a hurricane, this was documented by a community response team that went in afterward. One retired man became the de facto intelligence source within 72 hours. Not by choice. People started asking him. Did you see the Garcias leave? Do the Millers still have water? Is anyone in the corner house? He answered because he knew. And within a week, 2 separate groups on the same block were using him, independently, to assess which houses were worth approaching for resource trades, and which houses were vulnerable because the occupants had left. He didn't broker anything. He didn't threaten anyone. He just answered questions. And the information he provided rearranged the power structure of 4 blocks in 6 days. Move to the next house, the one with the truck in the driveway, the NRA sticker on the bumper, the game camera on the property line that everyone pretends not to notice. This neighbor shoots, hunts, owns firearms the way other people own kitchen appliances, casually, confidently, as a basic feature of the household. In a normal world, this is a hobby. In a resource-scarce world, this is the most unbalanced equation on your street. The armed neighbor with no pantry, weapons without supplies, capability without sustainability. The person who can project force but cannot feed himself past day 8. This combination is not rare. It's the default. The overlap between owns firearms and has 3 weeks of stored food is far smaller than most people assume. Most gun owners in suburban America have ammunition, cleaning kits, range memberships, and whatever is currently in their refrigerator. When the refrigerator stops working and the store doesn't reopen, the equation flips. The weapon doesn't become less relevant, it becomes more relevant, because it's the only asset that still functions. Recognition markers, hunting gear visible, talks about firearms openly, has security measures, cameras, motion lights, reinforced doors. But never discusses food storage, never mentions water, never talks about what happens after the shooting part. The gap between tactical preparation and logistical preparation is the profile. The wider the gap, the faster the transition. And the transition is not loud. It's not a raid. It's a knock on your door on day 6. Polite. Armed, but polite. Hey, we're organizing the block, pooling resources. Everyone's contributing. The gun isn't pointed at anyone. It doesn't need to be. Its existence in the conversation changes the math of every sentence that follows. Contribution becomes mandatory. Sharing becomes a suggestion with a holster attached, and the person making the suggestion genuinely believes he's helping. That's the part that breaks people's assumptions. The armed neighbor without food doesn't see himself as a threat. He sees himself as a leader. The weapon is his qualification. The request is his leadership. And if you say no, his definition of your relationship changes in the time it takes for the smile to leave his face. Now turn to the loudest house on the block. Every street has one. The door that's always open. The person who talks to everyone, knows everyone, is on a first-name basis with families 3 streets over. The connector. And the connector is the most underestimated profile in any neighborhood threat assessment. Here's what actually happens. In normal times, this person is the glue, organizes block parties, starts group texts, mediates petty disputes about trash cans and parking. Social currency is their oxygen. They collect relationships the way the watcher collects observations, automatically, compulsively, and with a granularity that would impress a census taker. They know that the Hendersons are having marital problems. They know that the single mom at the end works night shifts. They know that the old couple in the brick house has a son who visits every 3rd Sunday with bags of groceries. In a normal world, this is gossip. Under pressure, gossip becomes intelligence, and the connector becomes an information broker, whether they intend to or not. The transition happens faster than any other profile. Within 48 hours of a disruption, the connector is already doing what they've always done, talking. But the content shifts. Have you talked to the Garcias? I think they left. The Millers are running low, she told me. The house on the corner. I don't think anyone's checked on them. Each sentence sounds like concern. Each sentence is also a transaction. Information flows to the connector, and the connector distributes it to whoever is listening. They don't filter for consequences. They filter for social relevance. And in a crisis, social relevance and tactical relevance collapse into the same thing. I watched a version of this play out in a community that lost water pressure for 9 days after an infrastructure failure in the southeast. One woman, universally liked, knew every family, spent the first 3 days checking on people, sharing information, coordinating informal supply sharing. By day 5, she had become the clearinghouse. Everyone told her what they had and what they needed because she asked with warmth, and they trusted her with warmth. By day 7, 2 men on the street were using her information to decide which houses to approach for trades that were increasingly one-sided. She didn't realize what she'd enabled until a family she'd told about another family's water supply showed up at their door with a demand, not a request. She cried for 2 days afterward. She still doesn't understand how helping became a targeting system. The connector's marker is easy. You already know who this person is on your street. The marker is not the personality, it's the access. The connector knows things about your household that you haven't told many people, and they know the same things about every other household. That database exists in one person's social memory, unencrypted, unguarded, and accessible to anyone who maintains the relationship. Now the profile that will make you uncomfortable. Because this one doesn't look like a threat under any lens you're used to applying. The parent with young children and limited resources. The father who coaches soccer on Saturdays. The mother who brings cookies to school events. The family that decorates for every holiday and waves at you from the yard while the kids ride bikes in the driveway. Here's what actually happens to morality when a child says, "I'm hungry" on day 3 and means it. Not the whining kind of hungry that every parent navigates daily. The kind where the voice drops because the energy dropped first. And the child looks at the parent, and the parent sees in the child's face the one question that dissolves every ethical framework ever constructed. Why aren't you fixing this? That question rewrites the operating system. A person who would never steal will steal for a child. A person who would never threaten will threaten for a child. A person who would never break into a neighbor's garage will break into a neighbor's garage for a child and feel righteous doing it, because the moral math has been recalculated with a variable that outweighs everything else. This is not weakness. This is biology wearing a moral uniform. The evolutionary imperative to protect offspring doesn't negotiate with property rights. The recognition markers. Young children. Visible resource limitations, not poverty, but the ordinary thinness of a family living paycheck to paycheck with 3 kids who eat constantly. Limited storage space, no visible preparation, and, most importantly, the emotional bond between parent and child is visible to the street. You've seen it. The father who carries his daughter on his shoulders. The mother who walks her son to the bus stop every morning. That bond is also the fuse. The deeper it is, the faster the transition. And the transition happens in private, in the kitchen, at 2 a.m., when the child asks again, and the parent's face changes, and nobody on the street sees it happen. Here's the part that should keep you thinking. The desperate parent is the profile that generates the most violence in documented neighborhood-level resource conflicts. Not because parents are violent people, but because the motivation is absolute and the guilt is 0. A person stealing for themselves carries shame. A person stealing for a hungry child carries conviction. Conviction doesn't hesitate. Conviction doesn't negotiate. Conviction breaks the lock and takes what it came for, and goes home and holds the child and feels like a provider. And the neighbor who got robbed looks at the broken lock and thinks, who could have done this? And never once suspects the family with the bikes in the driveway. The uniform, or more precisely, the person who used to wear one. Former police officer, retired military, ex-firefighter. The man who spent 20 years being obeyed and has been in civilian life long enough to miss it. This profile operates on a single assumption that detonates under pressure. I am qualified to lead because I have led before. In a normal world, this is a benign credential. He tells stories at barbecues, offers security advice, maybe organizes the neighborhood watch. People respect him because the experience is real and the context is low stakes. Under disruption, the assumption metastasizes. He doesn't ask to lead, he assumes command, uses language from his former role, issues directives, expects compliance. And the first 48 hours, people comply, because the illusion of authority feels safer than the reality of no authority. The breakdown happens between day 3 and day 5. Compliance requires legitimacy. Legitimacy requires results. The former authority is operating from training designed for institutional contexts. Contexts with backup, communication, chain of command, legal framework. A residential street in a blackout has none of these. When his directives produce no improvement, when the water doesn't come back, when the information he gives turns out to be wrong, when the resource plan he created quietly benefits his house more than others, the compliance erodes, and the erosion enrages him. Because, in his framework, non-compliance is insubordination, not disagreement, defiance. And defiance triggers a response calibrated for a world where he had the institutional power to enforce it. In this world, he doesn't. What he has is a voice trained to command, a posture trained to dominate, and a gap between expectation and reality that fills with resentment hour by hour. I observed a retired sergeant during a 9-day utility failure Create a command structure for his block within 36 hours. Posted schedules, assigned watch rotations, designated resource collection teams. It was impressive. It was also non-negotiable. When a younger man on the third day questioned the watch schedule politely, with a valid point about sleep cycles, the sergeant's response was not a conversation. It was a correction. Tone shifted, volume dropped, eyes locked. 20 years of stops and calls and arrests compressed into one sentence. This isn't a discussion. The younger man backed down. 4 others stopped attending the meetings. By day 6, the command structure was the sergeant and 2 people who were afraid to leave. Everyone else had formed their own informal network, quieter, less organized, but free of the man who confused a cul-de-sac with a precinct. Recognition markers. Mentions former service frequently. Offers unsolicited tactical or safety advice. Natural authority in group settings that others defer to without questioning. The voice carries. And the most telling marker, he does not ask questions. He makes statements. This is a person who spent decades in a role where statements were sufficient. The transition point is the moment someone says no. And the last one. The profile I saved for the end because this is the one you can't investigate in advance. Can't identify, can't assess. Can't prepare for, because there's nothing to see. The ghost. The renter who moved in 8 months ago. The quiet house at the end of the block, you're not sure who lives there. The person who doesn't wave, doesn't attend anything, doesn't mow on the same day everyone else does, doesn't have a routine you recognize because you've never watched long enough to find one. Every other profile on this list has markers. The ghost has absence, no data, no relationship. No social contract, because a social contract requires 2 parties who acknowledge each other's existence, and you don't know this person exists in any functional sense. You know the house is occupied. You've seen a car, maybe a figure getting mail. That's it. And that absence is the threat profile. Not because the ghost is dangerous. He might be the safest person on the block. But you don't know. And in a resource-scarce environment, the unknown variable is the one that disrupts every calculation. You can model the watcher's behavior, predict the armed neighbor's timeline, anticipate the connector's information leaks, the parent's threshold, the authority's breaking point. The ghost, nothing. 0 inputs, 0 predictions, 0 preparation. He could be the person who offers help on day 1, or the person who breaches your back fence on night 3. Both outcomes carry equal probability because you have no data to weight either one. In almost every documented case of neighborhood-level conflict, the first physical confrontation involved a person who was functionally unknown to at least one party. Not a stranger from outside the area, a neighbor nobody knew well enough to predict. The ghost doesn't cause more conflict. The ghost causes unpredictable conflict. And unpredictable is what kills preparation. The fix is the one nobody wants to do because it requires admitting negligence. Walk over. Knock. Introduce yourself. Not as a threat assessment, as a human being who lives on the same street and hasn't bothered in 8 months. That interaction, 5 minutes of forced awkwardness, produces more useful data than any camera. A face, a voice, a handshake or the refusal of one. A glimpse through the door. 5 minutes and the ghost becomes a person. Still unknown in many ways, but no longer a 0 in every equation. 6 profiles. 6 people you wave at. The watcher who mapped your household without trying. The armed neighbor, whose weapon becomes a leadership credential when the food runs out. The connector, who turns concern into a targeting system without meaning to. The parent, whose love becomes the most dangerous override on the block. The authority, who mistakes a neighborhood for a chain of command. The ghost who exists in the gap between your assumptions and reality. None of them are bad people, not one. Every profile on this list is a person operating within normal human parameters. Curiosity, self-defense, sociability, parental love, leadership instinct, privacy. The parameters don't change. The context changes. And when the context shifts from abundance to scarcity, every normal trait becomes a vector. The same curiosity that makes the watcher helpful makes him a liability. The same love that makes the family down the street endearing makes them unpredictable. The same experience that makes the retired cop useful makes him dangerous when challenged. Your neighbors smiled at you this morning. Same smile, same wave, same driveway. Nothing has changed. Everything has changed. Because now you know what the smile is measuring. And you know that he doesn't know you know. And that gap between his wave and your awareness is the only advantage you'll get before the context shifts. Neighbors watch. Some wave while they do it. But there's one thing everyone on your street believes will stop any of these profiles from becoming an actual problem. Talking. De-escalation. The right words at the right moment. Tomorrow, the 30% of the time when the right words make everything worse. You trust most of them. That's not the problem. The problem is they trust you too. And trust, on a street with 6 profiles and 1 set of resources, is just access wearing a nicer name.